Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to take a journey across the Indian subcontinent, but not in the usual way. We're going to follow the very lifelines that have carved its landscape and shaped its destiny, its incredible river systems. But before we dive in, let's start with a big question. How does water draw the map of a nation? Seriously, think about that for a second. It's so much more than just lines on paper, right? Rivers are the artists that literally sculpt the land. They're the engines that drive economies, and they're the cradles where civilizations are born.
So, here's our game plan. We'll start with what a drainage system even is. Then we'll look at India's two major river groups, get to know the giants of the Himalayas, and journey through the rivers of the peninsula. And finally, we'll talk about what all this means for the future. Sound good? Let's get into it.
All right, first things first. Let's get the basics down. When we talk about a drainage system, what are we actually talking about? Well, a really easy way to think about it is like it's nature's own plumbing system.
You know, it's actually a super simple idea. Just picture tons of little streams, kind of like tiny veins on a leaf, all flowing from different directions and coming together to form one big main river. That river then does the heavy lifting, carrying all that water to its final stop, maybe a lake, a sea, or the ocean. And the whole area that's drained by that one single river system, that's what we call a drainage basin.
So what stops these huge basins from all just bleeding into each other? Well, that's where something called a water divide comes into play. It's basically any high ground, it could be a massive mountain range or even just a little bit of upland, that acts like a natural wall, forcing water to flow into one basin on one side or the other basin on the other. It's a simple concept, but it's a force that literally shapes continents.
Okay, so with those basic terms in our back pocket, we can now see how India's own geography creates this really amazing division. The country's rivers are basically split into two major and very, very different groups.
On one side, you've got the Himalayan rivers, born from the colossal icy peaks up north. And on the other, you have the peninsular rivers, the ones that slice their way across the southern plateau. And as you're about to see, these two groups couldn't be more different.
And this is where it gets really cool. The Himalayan rivers are what we call perennial, meaning they have water all year round, because they're fed by both rain and melting snow from the glaciers. Think of them as these epic, long-distance travelers, carving massive gorges through the mountains. The peninsular rivers, though, they're a totally different story. They're seasonal. They rely almost entirely on the monsoon rains, which means their journeys are much shorter and their riverbeds are a lot shallower.
So let's start our journey way up in the north, with the absolute giants born from ice and stone, the Himalayan rivers. Most of these rivers follow a kind of classic three-act story. In their youth, what's called the upper course, they're just bursting with power and energy, furiously cutting deep gorges through the mountains. Then, as they mature and hit the middle course on the flat plains, they start to slow down and chill out, forming those beautiful, winding meanders and oxbow lakes you probably remember from geography class. And finally, in their old age, the lower course, they drop off all the silt and sediment they've been carrying for so long, building up these massive deltas as they finally merge with the sea.
Now, within this big Himalayan group, there are three main superstars: the Indus, the Ganga, and the Brahmaputra river systems. Each one is a world unto itself.
First up, the Indus, and wow, the scale of this thing is just mind-blowing. It starts way up in Tibet, near Lake Mansarovar, flows west into India, and then takes a hard left turn south, running all the way to the Arabian Sea. We're talking 2,900 kilometers. That makes it one of the longest rivers on the entire planet.
Next up, the legendary Ganga. Its story begins high in the Himalayas, its headwaters fed by the enormous Gangotri Glacier. As it flows down onto the plains, it becomes this massive hub, collecting water from a huge network of other rivers, its tributaries, like the Yamuna and the Kosi, growing bigger and more powerful with every one that joins it.
And at over 2,500 kilometers long, the Ganga isn't just a line on a map. It's the lifeblood, the main artery of the huge northern plains, supporting millions and millions of people.
And check this out. This is what happens when two of these giants combine their incredible power. The Ganga and the Brahmaputra eventually meet and form the Sundarban Delta. It's the largest and fastest-growing delta in the world, a totally unique ecosystem, and, yeah, it's famously home to the Royal Bengal tiger.
And our third Himalayan giant is the Brahmaputra. This river has a wild story. It starts its life as the Zangpo in the cold, dry deserts of Tibet. Then it takes this insane U-turn, carving its way into India through a massively deep gorge. By the time it hits the state of Assam, it's this vast, braided river, carrying so much water and silt that its channel is constantly shifting, which unfortunately leads to some pretty devastating floods year after year.
All right, time to pack our bags and head south. We're leaving the snow-fed giants behind and turning our attention to the rain-fed arteries of the Indian Peninsula.
This table gives us a fantastic snapshot. You can see there's a really clear pattern here, right? Most of the major rivers, the Godavari, the Krishna, the Mahanadi, the Kaveri, they all start in the west, flow east, and drain into the Bay of Bengal. But look closer. You see the Narmada and the Tapi? They're the exceptions, the rebels. They actually flow west into the Arabian Sea, following the path of ancient cracks in the Earth's crust called rift valleys.
So you might be wondering, why do almost all of them flow east? Well, it all comes down to the Western Ghats. This long mountain range runs all the way down the west coast, and it acts as the main water divide for the whole peninsula. It's like a giant wall that catches the monsoon rains and forces nearly all the major rivers to flow east right across the Deccan Plateau.
Now, among all these peninsula rivers, one is king, the Godavari. At about 1,500 kilometers long, it is by far the largest. In fact, it's so important to the region, it's earned the nickname Dakshin Ganga, which means the Ganga of the South.
So, we've covered a ton of ground, from the icy peaks of the Himalayas all the way down to the southern coasts. But let's pull back for a second. What's the big picture here? Let's talk about the deep, fundamental connection between these rivers and the people of India.
I mean, for centuries, these rivers have been the absolute backbone of the economy. They provide our most basic resource, water, which is absolutely essential for things like agriculture and irrigation, but they're also crucial for navigation and for generating clean hydropower. They are quite literally pillars of the nation's economy.
But, and this is a big but, here comes the reality check. These very same lifelines are under incredible pressure. They're being choked by a massive load of untreated sewage and industrial chemicals. At the same time, the ever-increasing demand for water is draining many of them dry. Their natural ability to clean and replenish themselves is, well, it's just being overwhelmed.
Which brings us to this final and honestly really crucial question. For thousands of years, rivers have been the cradle of human civilization, giving birth to settlements that grew into great cities and empires. They have sustained us. The question we all have to ask ourselves now is, what will our legacy be for them?